Please welcome our panelists for a discussion about the future of regulatory modernization, moderated by Jennifer Yule with the Nuclear Energy Institute.
Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us for this session, and where we'll be discussing the future of regulatory modernization. It's a subject near and dear to my heart. As the U.S. looks to nuclear energy to support energy reliability, energy security, and to help drive our economic growth, the role of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is evolving, absolutely positively. The NRC's foundational commitment to safety remains paramount. The industry needs a strong and independent regulator. We want a strong, independent regulator. But today, the safety responsibility that they have needs to be matched with a regulatory approach that is timely, risk-informed, so we're focused on what matters most to safety, and is aligned with the scale and the pace of energy deployment needed to keep pace with the skyrocketing energy demand. So we've seen the NRC take very positive steps to streamline licensing, integrate risk insights into all aspects of the regulatory process, and to explore more flexible pathways for both existing plants and advanced reactors. But certainly, there are challenges that still exist. Licensing timelines are still uncertain, perhaps longer than we would want them to be. And critical reforms, like those envisioned by the overwhelmingly bipartisan ADVANCE Act and recent executive orders, need full and swift implementation. So our panel today brings together key voices from the industry and from non-governmental organizations to discuss what modernization really means in practice. So we're looking for tangible results. So how can we preserve our globally recognized regulatory excellence while eliminating inefficiencies that delay innovation and investment? So let's dive right in. With that, I will introduce our esteemed panels. First up is Judy Greenwald. She is the president and CEO of the Nuclear Innovation Alliance. She has over 35 years of energy and environmental policy leadership experience in the public and nonprofit sectors, including U.S. congressional staff, the White House Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. A highlight of her career is working on the 1990 Clean Air Act amendment as a congressional staff member. Peter Hastings is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Quality at Kairos Power. He leads teams responsible for licensing and permitting activities, safety analysis and probabilistic risk assessment, quality assurance, safeguards and security, and government affairs. So Peter, you're kind of busy, I take it. In addition, he is focused on establishing the regulatory basis for Kairos Power's reactor technology. Mr. Hastings previously ran a successful management and regulatory consulting firm and held prior positions as Director of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs for Generation M Power and as the licensing manager for Duke. Dave Benai is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Oversight at PSEG. Dave has over 40 years of experience in the industry working for PSEG, Entergy, NRC as a resident inspector, and at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard as a chief test engineer. Dave is one of the industry's experts in all aspects of the regulatory process, including licensing, inspection, and enforcement, and helps influence the industry's regulatory priorities and strategies. So, Dave, let's start with you. To deploy advanced nuclear, the industry really needs to rely on the existing fleet to serve as that foundation off of which to launch. So looking ahead, what do you see as the most critical regulatory changes needed to support the long-term viability and power uprates of the existing fleet?
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. Pleased to be here. Thanks for asking me to be on the panel. Before I answer that question directly, I look at where we are in the country right now. So I've been to a lot of sessions here. I was at the Advanced Reactor and Small Modular Reactor Conference last week in Nashville, Rick earlier this year, and some other industry forums. So we're really at this inflection point. It's the moment we have to meet this. We all have a part to play, including the industry. And when the ADVANCE Act was passed, it took that leadership to get that passed. She was on it this morning. And then is that rolled down to the staff with the ADVANCE Act, now go implement it, right? And so Brian Hansen said it in the previous session, preservation and operating of the operating fleet is really first and foremost. If we don't build a bridge with these existing plans to the new reactors won't need to be around. And so as it relates to, I'll speak to my home plant, Salem and Hope Creek, right? So we're pursuing subsequent license renewal. Extended power uprate at Salem. Currently we have 24-month fuel cycle and improved tech specs at Hope Creek. So it's very important that that be predictable, that it's reliable, that it's efficient. And so the staff in the ADVANCE Act, Section 505, there's a meeting tomorrow. Section 507, that's for licensing. 507 is today. It's security-centric. So those initiatives that the staff is undertaking, along with support and input from the industry and other stakeholders, it has to be followed through on. It has to be achieved.
Are you optimistic?
I am cautiously optimistic. I think I'll use like a couple of examples that I've seen. We're pursuing spent fuel pool criticality analysis. There's one reviewer that has a reputation of being a very thorough reviewer, we'll say it that way. And at a pre-application meeting, there was good open communication, and it was decided that, okay, if it's worded this way, I think we can do it that way. And that was a new behavior, right? At Salem, for our integrated leak rate test, you guys may not know what that is, but it's an important test we do every so often. We wanted to extend the frequency. We got it done in less time than most, and then most recently at Diablo Canyon. So I think there was like a 30% reduction in staff hours spent to review that. The safety evaluation report was like 18 pages versus 30-something for ours versus, so those are a couple of examples where I think the staff is getting the message.
Okay, good. So change is taking hold.
Yes.
Okay, Judy, let's go to you. Nuclear Innovation Alliance is looking at regulatory modernization in 3 timeframes: short, medium, and long term. What do we need to accomplish in each timeframe to reach the goal of licensing dozens of reactors per year?
Thanks so much for having me and for that question. As many of you know, the Nuclear Innovation Alliance thinks that NRC reform is urgent and important. We think that NRC's mission is extremely important. We can't have a healthy or well-performing nuclear energy sector without an effective and safety-focused regulator. At the same time, they have to do their job more efficiently. We do see progress being made. The way we think about the challenge of NRC reform is in 3 timescales. The first is what's happening now, where you essentially have near term, which is one-off regulatory innovation, which is essentially a cooperative effort between early mover nuclear energy industry innovators and the NRC. And what the task is that we have to find flexibility in existing rules that for the most part have evolved to work really well for conventional reactors. So we have to find flexibility and ways to make them implementable for a broader set of technologies. And that means that we need both applicants who have very good safety cases and they make those cases very clearly to the regulator so that they understand what the technology is and why it's safe. And it also means that we need the regulator to think about their rules in a way that's more performance-based, risk-informed, and technology inclusive, and that's challenging. And so a lot of what we're doing now is sort of one-off innovation. And that needs to go faster, but it's not going to be able to go as fast as we think we can get over time once we get to second, third, and nth of a kind. So that's sort of where we are now with a lot of these early movers. And then in parallel, we're working for the midterm, which is this, most people refer to the Part 53 rulemaking process, which is a new approach for regulation that should be inherently more risk-informed, performance-based, and technology inclusive, not just sort of finding flexibility in the old rules, but having a new approach, and that should be easier and for us to be able to go significantly faster. And then ultimately, we need what we refer to as high-volume licensing, where we get to the point, and this is going to take time, but hopefully, not as much time as it would take if we weren't really focused on getting better and faster at this, where we're essentially licensing the same thing repeatedly, and that should be much faster. And the way to get there is that you have to actually go through the first couple of stages. We have to make sure that we like the technologies that are being proposed, that they're certified to be safe, and that we get some experience at that early mover level. And then both what the NRC learns in terms of the safety cases that these technologies are making, and what the market learns about which ones are actually learning, that will essentially down select. We don't think that we're going to down select to like one technology, but not every technology that's being proposed is going to ultimately be successful in the market. So we'll be down selecting to a few technologies, probably at least a couple for each use case, and there are many use cases. And then we'll get to the point where we have standardized technologies, and then we can have standardized licensing that should be able to go much faster. And I think it's important that we keep our eye on that prize of getting much faster, but not confuse where we are in the timescales, because the early movers are going to have to take a bit longer, and we want to make sure we get those right, and then that will set the stage where we can go really fast. I should mention one thing that sort of goes along with this time frame, although it's a little bit independent of it, and that's getting environmental reviews to go faster. And there's a lot of work going on each of those timescales. Bit greater use of flexibility, and not everyone has to do a full-blown environmental impact statement. You can do a generic environmental impact statement. You could do an environmental assessment. We may be able to do categorical exclusions for some types of reactors. So getting much faster at that is really important in parallel with getting faster at the safety reviews.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's turn to somebody who recently did go through an environmental review. So Peter, congratulations on Kairos's progress towards plant deployment. So let's talk about what steps Kairos is taking to address construction risk and uncertainty for new nuclear. So you've undertaken an iterative process for construction. So what has Kairos learned by doing this?
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for the invitation to be here. Honored to be here among such an august panel. Excuse me. For those who aren't familiar with Kairos's iterative development approach, we talk about it all the time. We have sort of baked into our process, into our DNA as a company, actually, a plan, design, build, test cycle, series of plan, design, build, test cycles at the component and even subcomponent level that eventually manifests itself in major pieces of hardware. And that includes our non-nuclear reactor size scale prototypes, the engineering test unit series. We have 3 different iterations of those that ultimately then lead to nuclear iterations at the test scale, ultimately culminating in our commercial product. As we sit here today, we've built, commissioned, operated, and decommissioned the first engineering test unit in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it operated at temperature. It was the largest FLIBE installation, that's our molten salt, in the world, 12 metric tons of FLIBE circulating for several thousand hours at temperature and circulating 30,000 surrogate fuel pebbles, non-nuclear fuel pebbles, as a proof of concept the next iteration from there is the second engineering test unit, which will be in the same footprint as the original engineering test unit and is intended to demonstrate the value of modular skid construction. From there, the third iteration of the engineering test unit, which will be primarily focused on civil works at Oak Ridge, immediately adjacent to the Hermes reactor. So you can see how these iterations help develop certainty, build certainty, cost certainty in that construction. By the time we build the first reactor, we will have built something that looks like it several times already. And by the time we get to the commercial fleet, we will have done some version of that even more times. The foundation for the third engineering test unit in Oak Ridge is essentially complete. And we gained experience in building that foundation using drilled pier construction, which is unique for nuclear facilities, as a precursor to the first safety-related concrete for an advanced reactor in the U.S. Just a couple of weeks ago. The foundation work for the ETU-3 as practice, if you will, for Hermes is a really good example of how that iterative development approach works in order to apply learnings from prior iterations to future iterations. It also works in sort of programmatic space. Licensing Hermes gives us a lot of experience to licensing Hermes 2, which will in turn provide a lot of experience for the commercial fleet.
Okay, great. So Dave, from your perspective at PSEG, how have current regulatory inefficiencies affected project timelines, staffing, or investment decisions?
As I said earlier, Jennifer, we're pursuing a bunch of improvements to the plan to make them either run for 24-month cycles or increase the output as well as for another 20 years. And so as we look at that, we want it to be predictable and reliable. And so a couple of these things based on the IRA and PTCs and ITCs, we weren't thinking of those before. So as we began, I'm not saying we were late, but we started, hey, we're going to do this now. So we're predicting startup in our cycle in 2029 with an uprate. So that needs to happen. We're ordering fuel that way, those kinds of things. So it's very important. And so I will say this, we've staffed up a new generation projects because of these, and we need to deliver on these projects from our standpoint, and we need the regulatory reviews to be predictable and stable, and so we can meet those deadlines that we've made the commitments to our shareholders.
Thank you. So Judy, as we're seeing executive actions that look to alter the regulatory framework, can you speak to the importance of the NRC for the evolution of the industry?
I really think you can't have a effective and well-performing nuclear industry without an independent and effective and well-regarded nuclear safety regulator. So I really think that the success of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and its credibility is intertwined with the success of the industry. I really don't think you can have one without the other. So we are certainly hopeful that NRC will be able to maintain its independence, maintain its resources, maintain high-quality staff. And so that's going to, interestingly, relate to a lot of the authorities they've been given under the ADVANCE Act to become more efficient and effective while maintaining their safety mission, and also to use new hiring authorities so that they have the right people to do all these new and different licensing activities, and also to have a management approach, which we think that they have put in place with the commission, the executive director for operation, the line managers, all the way down are committed to maintaining their role as a really effective safety regulator and doing that more efficiently. So we think it's really important that NRC be excellent, and we think that they think so too. And we just are hopeful that the administration will recognize that and make sure that they have the resources and the authorities and the ability to do what they need. Certainly Congress has done a lot through the ADVANCE Act, and we expect will continue to do a lot through oversight. And we really do commend the Congress, including especially Chair Capito, who've really done so much to enable the NRC to meet this moment, and now they just have to do it.
Thank you. So Peter, what other policy tools do you think would accelerate regulatory modernization?
So there are a number of things that I think can be done. We've talked previously about streamlining the environmental reviews and NRC's implementation of NEPA. A lot of that work has begun, and we look forward to that continuing. A policy issue that would help a lot that is not within the NRC swim lane is the country moving forward on the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and actually implementing the law. That would be nice. It represents a sort of an artificial barrier to licensing. And I say artificial because it implies a sort of an existential threat from nuclear waste that simply isn't technically accurate. It's not really a threat. But it stands in the way of a lot of people's perception about the ability to move forward. Unrelated to that, but the timing of the question is good because just last week, we joined with ClearPath, the Clean Air Task Force, and Veriton to make a proposal to the NRC about improving or establishing a new framework for licensing a certain sort of class of reactor. And I'll try not to get too far down into the weeds here. But as background, in the last several years, through activities associated with emergency planning and security and other sort of policy level issues, a new figure of merit has emerged that the industry and the NRC staff have sort of coalesced on as sort of a marker for what threshold can result in reduced regulatory burden, and it's the 1 rem radiological exposure at the site boundary. And what we've proposed, what the team proposed, and this is in a letter that was endorsed by Kairos as well as others, is a framework that takes advantage of that recognition of the reduced risk profiles to plot a path that reduces some of the arbitrary regulatory burdens that apply to the current operating fleet. And I want to pause for a second and talk about reduced risk profiles. It's really important to recognize that we're talking about reduced risk profiles, safer, if you will, compared to the operating fleet. And we're comparing to the safest form of electricity production the species has ever devised. That's really important not to lose track of. And so why are we worried about making it safer? How safe is safe enough? And it's not about making it safer because they're not safe enough. It's about making them safer to reduce the capital cost of the plants, because that's the primary barrier to entry today to new nuclear is capital cost. And if we can shrink the safety footprint by relying on more intrinsic safety, passive safety means, we've all talked about this for years and years, then that will reduce the capital cost. And the regulatory framework associated with implementing those lower risk designs ought to be commensurate with the risk of the plants. That's going to be a really, really important policy level and procedural and regulatory level effort on the part of the NRC. We have the proposal, even though it only went in last week, has been very positively received so far. And we look forward to continuing to work with them on that.
Okay, great. Well, now let's open it up to all of you. What is on your mind? We do have some questions that have been submitted through Slido. I'm going to take a couple and tweak a little bit and ask you all. We've talked a lot about what NRC can do to enhance efficiency. So if we do end up seeing less staff at the agency, what does the industry need to do to evolve and, I would say, promote a more efficient interaction with the regulator? Start with Judy.
So I hope we don't see less staff, but I think no matter what the staffing level is there's a lot that the industry can do. And what we like to say is that you need both good applicants and good reviewers to have a good licensing process. And I think a lot of it is on industry to make the case for its technology and for its safety performance, and to do so in a way that anticipates what the NRC is going to need to do an effective and efficient review. And I think there's a lot that the industry can do in advance of that. I also think NRC can do a lot in being very clear about what their expectations are. I think both NRC and the applicants can be clear about scheduling to make sure that they actually have an agreed upon schedule and that they both meet their obligations. We have seen times in the past where NRC doesn't meet its deadlines, and we've also seen where the companies don't meet their deadlines. So you really need both the applicant and the NRC to be committed to a schedule and to actually meet that schedule and to produce the information that's needed and in a form that is useful to both sides, and that then they can move ahead. We also think it's really important that decisions get made. Sometimes there's a tendency to sort of put off making a decision. I need more information. We want to keep learning, and that is important, but it's very important to realize that you have to make a decision and that you have to get the information that you need to do that, and you have to make the best decision you can with the information that you have before you. And so it's really incumbent upon both the companies and the agency to make sure that that's the case.
Thank you, Judy. So Dave, let me ask you the same question. What can the industry do to improve its interactions with the agency to make licensing more efficient?
All right, thank you. What I would say is, and we're doing a lot of licensing where I work, we interact with the staff quite a bit, and what I'll say, it always comes down to good communication, open, honest, real. I also know that with the pre-application meetings or the pre-submittal meetings, we go in prepared for those. We have our rational basis laid out, and we have that interaction with the staff. We're open to feedback. We listen. As a good friend of mine once said, I'm rarely wrong when I listen. And so we try to hear that feedback from the staff. And then there can be some interactions there that when we walk away and we're going to go submit that license amendment request, that we submit it with high quality. It's got, doesn't have a lot of holes in it, so that it's incumbent upon us so that when we submit that, like our reputation's on the line. So what kind of licensee are we? Do we really have a good, strong technical basis? Do we answer the questions? And so to me, that's the part that we can play. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. You know, the industry needs a strong, credible regulator, and the regulator can be efficient. And so ultimately, that independence has to happen. And I was reading the Principles of Good Regulation this morning, and the first one is independence. And it said, yeah, they have to be independent, but they don't have to do it in isolation. So I think that communication, it's not consulting, it's interacting with the agency, and I think that communication leads to good things.
So can you expound on that a bit further? I'm not sure everybody understands what we mean by not being a consultant. So can you give an example, perhaps, of maybe a previous application that you filed with your companies, and then how did that work in terms of getting approval?
All right, so I think that's a good, more specific question. So as I said before, what we try to do is the approach I outlined a minute ago was what we try to do. So in our pre-application meetings, we've gotten good insights. It's helped develop a better quality submittal. And in my prior lifetime as an NRC resident, you know, in my mind, consulting is, hey, NRC, is it okay if I do this? And that's not what that is. That interaction isn't saying, is it okay? It's saying, hey, this is our approach, this is our basis, and then there's a chance to ask questions and an opportunity to get some clarity. So to me, that's the difference between open communication and consulting. We're not asking how to do it. We're saying, we're going to do it this way. Here's why.
Thank you. So Peter, as an advanced reactor design applicant, what would you think the industry could do to enhance the efficiency of the whole licensing process?
So first of all, everything both of them said, agreed 100%. And I particularly want to reiterate the point that both of them made about being responsive when answering a question, or being proactive in recognizing an issue might exist, and holding each other accountable on the applicant or licensee side and on the NRC staff side as well. If it looks like things are going sideways, escalate immediately. NRC management has said that for years. They're actually serious about it. They want to know so that we can avoid what has happened in the past. Fortunately, hasn't happened in a while, at least in my experience, but where you would get into just this endless cycle of 3 or 4 or 5 or 12 rounds of questions on the same issue. Escalating those issues immediately is really important. And holding yourself accountable to what you know the NRC staff needs to make their finding, and holding the staff accountable if they're not performing. One of the few silver linings of COVID was it introduced a lot of tools that we suddenly had to use in order to avoid things grinding to a screeching halt. And some of them are very obvious, use of Zoom and Teams and all that stuff. Use of an electronic reading room so that information can be shared with the NRC staff without having to burn a lot of time to travel to come to the site. Using audits as much as possible to get at the answers in real time. We managed to obviate the formal RAI process almost entirely with both of our construction permit reviews. It doesn't mean we didn't answer questions. We answered hundreds of questions. We just answered them in real time and avoided that sort of long, protracted letter writing cycle. To the point that Dave made, really important to recognize both within your own team, but also within the NRC staff's team, that collaboration does not equal collusion. And there's been a sensitivity in the past to the notion that the NRC can't consult. And we all get it. The staff is right to be sensitive to it. It's really easy to fall into the trap of being perceived as colluding with the regulator, and that's not what's happening. When the staff asks a question and we say, in the interest of getting resolution of this issue quickly, here's what we think is the answer. Does that answer your question? And if the answer is no, why would you commit an entire cycle of providing an answer that you know isn't going to be acceptable? It can be a fine line because you do want to get into the weeds on details and make sure that you understand the question and that the question is going to scratch the itch of the staff, but it's really important to have that communication. One of the best manifestations of that is the NRC staff's pre-submittal review, readiness review, if you will, of an application, where they will come in at your invitation and flip through your application and tell you in advance, this isn't going to answer the mail. If you submit this, we won't be able to accept this, or we already know that we're going to have a question if this is what you submit. It gives you an opportunity to ameliorate those issues before you get on the clock, if you will. And then finally, and this is sort of philosophical as well, I always hold to the philosophy that I'm never going to go to the NRC and ask them what the answer is. I'm always going to go in and say, here's our position on what this particular issue is. Do you agree? And that can be extended to recognize that we're going to have fewer NRC staff to work with. The executive orders notwithstanding, if the number of applications that they are fielding are being fielded by the same number of people, each application is going to enjoy fewer staff to work on it. And so look for opportunities for the applicant to do more of the work, if you will. There's one of the things I don't remember if it was in advance or one of the previous legislations, about the notion of the environmental report that's submitted with an application becoming the de facto draft EIS. That's a great example. If we can do the work and the NRC staff can review it and say, yep, that's the right answer, and it saves NRC staff resources, it saves me money from NRC staff resources because I pay them more than I pay my guys, then that's a good thing. And looking for those kinds of opportunities is important.
Okay, thank you. So looking at some of the questions that you all have asked, let's now turn to artificial intelligence. Certainly it is resulting in an increased demand in electricity, but at the same time, how can AI play a role in modernizing the regulatory process? Why don't we start with Judy?
So I think AI is sort of lot of people excited about it, and there certainly are lots of ways that you could apply AI throughout the nuclear energy system. There's both on the side of the applicants, they can use AI more in the design phase as well as in how they do their work. And then from the NRC side, they can use AI more in organizing their own information and making their information accessible. I think there is work to be done for NRC to think about what is acceptable in terms of applicants providing information that they develop through AI. And I think that there could be better guidance on that, and it probably needs some mutual development on the part of industry and NRC to make sure that applicants are providing things that NRC can accept and that NRC understands what it is that the applicants are doing. And it's a very promising area. You just want to make sure that there's a shared understanding between NRC and applicants about what needs to happen. And I guess I'd make this sort of shared understanding point more broadly. I think one of the reasons that we're making some progress on this issue about consulting or not is that I think there is growing recognition that it's actually in both the applicants and the NRC's interest to really understand what each other are doing and thinking and try to anticipate so that you don't get into one of these endless do loops where you misunderstand each other's questions or what each other are providing. So I think there's a lot that proactively the industry could do generically to develop a greater shared understanding of the potential role for AI.
So Dave, how about we take subsequent license renewal? How can AI help the NRC be more efficient?
Yeah, I think that's a great application of AI where we're already talking about reducing the review hours. So obviously, most of us have gone through license renewal. There were thousands of hours for that. Subsequent license renewal should be less than that, and there are some good targets that are out there that are being met, and I think that it could be used to even lower those review hours and not sacrifice quality at all.
Peter, any comments on AI?
So
or either NRC can use it or perhaps the industry?
I want to see us get to the level of trust but verify. I've done enough ChatGPT experiments to know I'm not at the trust level yet. It's just not ready for prime time. A lot of promise, a good sort of perspective on where we need to go to get it to be useful. And we'll take as an example either the preparation of or the review of license applications. Obvious target for improvements using AI. And I had an experience with an outfit who was working on a large language model to try to make this happen. And they had missed the point that there's lots of information available publicly on what a license application contains. The vast majority of the application is publicly available. You can feed tons of applications, thousands of pages of application content into a large language model, and that's really useful. What they had missed is that a license application contains no original work. There are statements of fact in an application that are underlain by hundreds of thousands of pages of calculations and analyses and specifications and so forth that aren't publicly available, that aren't on the docket. And if you rely simply on farming the application content to feed into a large language model, you're going to miss the intellectual properties that underlie those statements of fact. So there is a substantial amount of work to do to figure out how to make that work. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but it's gonna take a lot of very thoughtful work. And of course, as everybody will attest to, you can't just have the AI robot go off and do something and let it go unchecked.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll go to a question from the audience. I thought this one was particularly good, and that is recognizing the value of improving the efficiency of NRC licensing activities and the importance of public acceptance of nuclear. How do you communicate about continued high safety standards to the public, but at the same time not hamper the deployment of new nuclear? So Peter, we'll start with you.
So it's a good question, and the new regulatory framework proposal that I mentioned earlier is a good example of a communication challenge, because it can easily be inferred that we want to reduce regulatory burden and you know, create these shortcuts, and that's not what it's about at all. It's about recognizing the level of regulatory burden, if you will, commensurate with the risk associated with whatever the undertaking is. And in this case, we're talking about designs that if one were to equate the risk to mathematics, they're just ridiculously small risks compared to all the other risks that we face every day. And the reason it's challenging is because we're terrible as a species at perceiving and communicating risk. And it's actually not very helpful for me to convey to somebody, well, I'm less dangerous than this thing over there that they're psychologically comfortable with because they have this perception that they're in control of it, right? So we could go on with that subject for days. But communicating plainly and clearly that we're not talking about cutting corners, we're talking about establishing the right level of regulation for what is a very low-risk activity, again, whether we're talking about the operating fleet or new reactors.
So I'm going to change the question up a little bit for you, Dave, and just ask you to talk a little bit about NRC's new mission statement that was required to be put together through the ADVANCE Act. How have you seen the mission statement actually changing the way the NRC continues to engage with the public as well as the licensees and applicants?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I know with the mission statement, there was a lot that went into that, and I think the final product was really good. And it is a cultural and philosophical shift, in my view, for the agency, and it's one that's necessary to meet the moment, or leverage the moment, or Renaissance 2.0, whatever you want to call it. And you know, from that mission statement, it's going to take leadership to go implement. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, you know, that overwhelming broad bipartisan support, 88-2 in the Senate, right? Was it 393-11? So I gave a talk last year, and I said, I'm not a betting person, but I'm pretty sure I know who the two dissenting senators were, and I looked it up, and I said it out loud at the meeting, and I verified it later, but it was my home state of Massachusetts, Senator Ed Markey, and the state that I call home now is Vermont, Bernie Sanders, right? So some people aren't going to change. Some people do. So we had this broad bipartisan support. Here comes the ADVANCE Act, the mission statement, and from that mission statement, that can help send the signals for the cultural change, right? And I've had some conversations. I've heard the commissioners speak at the RIC and some other forums. Commissioner Kroll, I talked with him a little bit yesterday. Commissioner Marzano last week at NSIAC, and I believe that the commission sees their opportunity to lead the agency, not just be this five-headed, hey, we're the commission, right? And I've had conversations with Marella Gorillas, the EDO, Mike King, the acting director of NR, Craig Erline, Inter Office Director, and it exists at that level. That cultural shift is existing, and they're pushing it downward. I think some of us may have heard the term NRC wants to go to a project management culture. That's one of the changes that Marella is trying to affect. I mentioned a couple of anecdotes earlier where I see the staff responding to that. And looking at I've participated in some of the ADVANCE Act public meetings, you know, Section 505, 507, and I see the staff embracing, and they're seeing the need for change, and not just Congress told them to. And I think the industry is doing its part, and there are NGOs that are involved as well, providing their input. So I do think that the staff is recognizing what they have to go do. And so I think it's going to take root. As I said earlier, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think, you know, if you listen to some of the panels yesterday, my view is that energy security is national security, and to meet this moment of energy independence, and both sides of the aisle, you know, they support nuclear, maybe for different reasons, but they're all good reasons. And I think in this case with AI, and some of you, I'll have a humorous reference here from the legend of Ricky Bobby. If you're not first, you're last. We do not want to be last in AI. So these data centers, they want to be powered by clean energy. They're energy ravenous. And so to meet that moment, the regulator has to be ready to do these reviews efficiently. And I talked about the existing fleet before, right? We're still operating, right? The inspection staff has to be efficient. There's still some pockets where I will say I'll pick on the Holtec dry cask shim issue, right? I thought the agency had a much better chance to treat that as it's truly low safety significance and do it more efficiently. And I wonder, okay, so that's the operating fleet, and it should be pretty obvious this is low safety significance. How is this agency going to meet the moment for advanced reactors? And I think those are just a couple of examples where I think the staff can do better. And they've been told that, by the way, so this is not a news flash. So I think there are still pockets, I'll call it, of resistance to that cultural change. And like all change, it takes a while. I like to say with cultural change, it's one disciple at a time, it's one person at a time. So with that right leadership and accountability and metrics, it can be achieved.
Okay, thanks very much. So Judy, what do you think?
So I think that the mission, NRC's mission, I think always has been broader than maybe many people thought. And this mission statement revision, I think, is maybe as much a reminder of that as something new. And the way they're implementing it is to sort of remind everyone. And I think that that's very useful. If you look at the Advanced Act implementation page, which I recommend, it's way easier to navigate than Adams. If anybody's been scared about Adams, this is very transparent about everything they're doing and the importance of their mission and how all of what they're doing ties back to what the mission is very transparent and I think very important, and I think is encouraging a lot of the staff to really buy in, and so I think it's a really good thing. I would put this in the broader context of how in our country we've needed to be reminded of this with all types of energy infrastructure. I think we had gotten away from that and had started to at least implicitly act as though it didn't matter if it took years or even decades to build things, which was really never okay. But I think it's become more obvious that that's not okay when we have the climate imperative, we have the meeting the AI energy needs imperative, we have our energy security imperative. So it's really important that we build things that are safe, that are clean, and that we build them efficiently and effectively, and that we engage the public efficiently and effectively. We don't want to waste the public's time either. And I think gets back a little bit to your earlier question about how do you communicate to the public. And I think if you have an efficient and transparent public process that doesn't take forever, that actually you can engage the public better than if you have a process that takes forever and never comes to a decision. So I really do think that doing its job efficiently, effectively has always been NRC's mission, and now I think we're all reminding ourselves of that case and actually implementing policies and procedures and guidance to actually make that real.
Okay, thank you. So Peter, how about you in terms of the mission statement? Have you seen recent changes as a result of the mission statement change that have perhaps made things more efficient?
So we've had very good experience with the staff on the two Kairos construction permits. How much of that is directly attributable to the change in the mission statement is unclear. Those things were sort of happening in parallel. But I think the fundamental change in the mission statement that I see is the message to the staff that it's okay to enable. That's sort of the key differentiator between the old mission statement and the new statement. And I think it's important to recognize, back to the collaboration isn't collusion discussion we had earlier, enabling is not advocacy. And enabling something that is not being the barrier to something while doing your job that Judy spoke about, I think is really important. And we've seen a bit of a philosophical sort of cultural shift on the part of the staff.
So Judy, let's go back to you. There's a question from the audience. Can you talk more about efficiencies as we down select? Do you think having multiple reactor designs before has hurt us?
So I think it has hurt us before, but I think that you still have to go through a process to get to the point that we are not just doing one-offs. I do think the fact that we have, I don't know, 94 reactors last count in this country, and they're each pretty much their own thing, is not ideal. On the other hand, you know, we're not like France, where the government said one design and then everyone listens. We tend to be more, we tend to disperse authority and decision-making more in this country by states, by utilities, by customers. So I think that getting to a set of more consistent and standardized design is going to be a process. And so I imagine a situation where there are only a few that make it, but I think it's going to be a process. So yes, I think maybe that will have some inefficiencies in the short term, but it'll get us to a better place where ultimately you'll only have a few designs and you will repeat them, but they will have gone through a process where customers look at them, where the NRC looks at them, where utilities look at them, where the designers look at it, where the public looks at that. And so we'll emerge, I think, out of that with a pretty efficient system where we can do things again and again that are similar instead of having each one be a bespoke design.
So Dave, what is your opinion on that?
The way I look at it is, you know, I think there's room for everybody. And as I said, I was at that conference last week, so it was Kairos, Deep Fission, NuScale, TerraPower. I think as they move forward with their designs and as they get approved by the NRC and then constructed, I think if they're well designed and well licensed, then you can get that first of a kind and nth of a kind, because there's different applications, right? If you're looking at in Kemmerer, Wyoming, that might be different than a power-hungry place like the Mid-Atlantic region from Richmond up to Boston. So I do think there's going to be the need for different style reactors, for whether it's Dow Chemical and heat with X energy. So I do think there's that need for a variety of reactors, and I think from the lessons learned from days gone by is that, you know, once it gets built and licensed, that you're staying true to that, or if it is changing, it's because it's making it a better design if you're improving upon that first of a kind.
Okay, thanks. So Peter, to you, another question from the audience. Can we accelerate international bilateral recognition of licenses once issued by a trusted nation's regulator so as not to require companies to redo the approval process?
Yes.
Do you care to elaborate at all,
Sure.
Peter?
So it's a really good question, and it's a hard question. Harmonization of standards and regulations has been the holy grail for quite some time, and the barriers are obvious. No one is going to suggest to a nation that they sort of compromise their own sovereignty and their own authority to regulate their own facilities as they see fit, and everybody gets that. There is a lot of work underway at the International Atomic Energy Agency. I happen to be one of the co-chairs of a team within the World Nuclear Association with some colleagues from a lot of US companies, actually, including NuScale and GEH. And that team within World Nuclear Association has become sort of the voice of the industry on the other side of the IAEA in their Nuclear Harmonization of Standards initiative. And it's very clunky, it's sort of bureaucratic as things like this are when negotiating amongst countries. It's tedious, it's a lot of work, but there is progress being made toward trying to get there. And the NRC, to their credit, is really leaning into that initiative as well. There's also a very strong collaboration between the NRC and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission on a lot of things that they're trying to do in parallel as well. So it's an important initiative.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I don't see the question anymore, but I think the way they asked it was the right way, and I just want to emphasize the wording matters. They said mutual recognition. I actually think that is achievable, and in fact, there's a lot of discussion going on among various regulators. The US NRC talks a lot to the Canadian regulator, the UK regulator, others about mutual recognition. I think a harder lift, which some people advocate, is harmonization, where you'd have the same standards. I think that would be very difficult, but I think mutual recognition, that we have different regimes, but they both get to the same place, and we can recognize that, is something that countries do in a lot of other policy arenas, and actually US states do. In a lot of different arenas, states will recognize each other's decisions, even though they might have somewhat different approaches. And I think that's eminently doable, and then you can have the situation where a company doesn't have to go through the same process, or a similar process in multiple different jurisdictions.
Thanks. So Dave, we have 1 minute left, and we haven't talked a lot about the inspection process. So keeping the time limit in your mind.
40 seconds by that clock.
Let me turn to you and say, what are you looking for in an efficient inspection process?
Yeah, I think there's lots of room for efficiency, documentation, travel, what they look at, focusing on safety significant and how is it a nexus to safety. I think there's lots of room for efficiency gains without giving up anything in the way of safety. And working more efficiently is inherently safer because we spend a lot of time on things and we want to spend it on the right things.
Okay, great. Last question for you all. This is like the speed round. Scale from 1 to 10, Judy, with 10 being the best. Where do you see the NRC right now in terms of getting to what we are hoping to achieve as a very efficient regulator?
So I think we're...
Quick. A
number.
A 9.
A 9, but it's fragile.
Okay.
And it could get messed up. So let's make sure we keep letting them do what they're doing.
Peter.
7.43.
And Dave.
I'm going to say the 2 words, directionally correct, 5.9.
Okay. All right. Well, please join me in thanking our panel for a very interesting conversation.